I'm delighted to welcome for the third time on the podcast Jessica Bowler. Jessica is a marketing procurement consultant specializing in pharmaceutical and biotech industries. She spent most of her 24 years working in marketing procurement, so frankly, she has a very, very valuable perspective to share with agencies. So, Jessica, welcome back.
Thank you, Jenny. It's so fun to be back.
Honestly, I'm really glad to have you here, and let's dive into the questions because let's see what's changed since we last spoke. So let's
Absolutely.
start here. From your vantage point of over 20 years in marketing procurement, what has changed most in procurement, in how procurement specifically views agencies today?
Absolutely. So in my opinion, for those that are doing this well, it's more of a true partnership mentality. And there are some companies out there, whether we're talking about pharma or biotech, that are still working with a large number of agencies, pharma in particular. I think there's some that are still working in that 10 to 20 agency model. But many, many, many companies have moved into or are now working in having one preferred agency, or maybe one, two, or three, or maybe one to five. And that in and of itself has really changed the overall relationship and view of procurement, and that procurement agency relationship on both sides. And
Mm,
then I think we always talk about, what's misunderstood about procurement and their role. And, are there myths? And I do think there are some myths about how we work that aren't true, that people see us as all we want to do is save money for the company. And sure, that's always part of the equation, but I don't see it as the whole picture. And, in my role, I've never been sort of one to be out to get the suppliers. It couldn't be further from the truth for me. And I do think sometimes we have to play the bad cop, but that's not all we are. And, I certainly take the role very seriously. I take that partnership mentality really seriously. And I want to build a foundation of trust and partnership. It only helps us, with the whole model.
mm. And what would you say for someone listening who has experienced maybe not your type of marketing person and your philosophy, i.e., we work in partnership? What if an agency is listening to this and their impression of procurement is different? What would you say to them?
I would say to them, take a step back and really try to, I know no one has time today, right? Everyone's busy, everyone's doing, more than one job. Um, and everyone's doing that, doing more with less, no matter what type of company you're talking about. But I do think taking that 10 to 15 minutes with the person the next time you're talking to them and saying, what can we do to sort of strengthen our overall relationship? Like, I know every time we talk, it's business, 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 but I really want to take our relationship and our partnership to the next level. And I'm not saying, they need to come over to your house and have tea, but really try to understand what that next level of partnership looks like and how you can get there with the person. I really do think underneath it all, we're all human beings. We're all trying to do the best thing for our businesses, no matter what side of the aisle we're on. And I just think without that foundation of trust and communication and understanding how people work, you're not going to be able to move forward. It's always just going to be this transactional relationship.
What does that look like in practice, Jessica? What tactics would an agency typically employ? So they spend 10 to 15 minutes asking for feedback. What would strengthening the relationship look like for you, maybe, which is a great start. But what in practice have you seen works really well if you've got an agency that wants to maintain that relationship with procurement? What do procurement want from the agency to value a meeting with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it depends on where that agency is and what type of work you're doing currently with the company. Um, I know a lot of people will use changes that are going on internally within their company or maybe a new technology that they've acquired or some sort of innovation that they're really excited about or some sort of new hire, just sort of use that as the hook to get them on the phone. And then once you're on the phone, I think you can really talk about, other things, maybe other things you're doing with other partners that you're working with that, that you really feel you could pull through and utilize over here. So I do think you probably need that hook to get them on the phone, but then once they're on the phone, the agenda is yours to sort of really build what you're looking for.
And for you, I know that I'm not going completely on my questions, but for you, in terms of, let's
That's
suppose there's
okay.
an agency there's an agency that says, listen, Jessica, we've got some new tech or this innovation's happening. Let's have a meeting. What would be the subject matter? Let's suppose you're purchasing influencer marketing services, for example. What would be interesting for you to see in a meeting about this innovation?
Yeah, I mean, it always depends on how much they can show you, right? And we do have, massive confidentiality throughout this industry. But I actually did this recently. Someone wanted to show me some new technology that they were utilizing. It's a different agency team than I've ever worked with before. So I said, hey, can I come see you live and in person and really see how that technology is working with the other, company you're working with? Is there anything you'll be able to show me? Can you cover up for confidentiality? And while we're there, I'd love to meet in person the new people on the team. If people could spare a little bit of time, maybe we could have a working lunch. And they were completely open to it. And for me, I think that pays off in spades. And I know it's a time commitment for people, but I just think the payoff is so big that once you see someone in person, it's so much easier to work on Zoom and email and text. You understand their context and where it's coming from and how they communicate. And I just think it helps you really establish those ways of working for whatever personalities you're working with. And while I was there, I saw this really cool innovation that I could take back to the teams I'm working with and say, I know we're not doing it today and we probably don't need it today, but next year this is really something we might be able to, utilize. And I think it's worthwhile at some point when you have the time marketers for you to have a 15-20 minute meeting for me to show you this technology. Because I also think it allows you to sort of be really what we are is the go-between between the agency and our marketers, and no one has time on either side. So if I can be that conduit and I can say, listen, they're not looking to waste your time, they actually did purchase this really cool technology, and again, it's not something we can use today, but I think it's something we should think about in 6 months or 9 months or 12 months.
Can you? This might be confidential, so don't feel obliged. But can you describe the type of technology that was so innovative that it made you think, actually, I'm going to go to their office and suggest a meeting so I can have a look?
I can't say too much, but it had to do with utilizing AI. And I know you had a question for me, during this conversation about AI. And, it was sort of a new way to think about generating insights. And I just thought it was really interesting. I think we'll have to put it to use to see, if it really works. But what a new innovative idea to be bringing to the table. And obviously, they invested money in it. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out in the real world.
Amazing. I'm surprised that you were the one to suggest an in person meetup. And I'm hoping that account managers, agency owners are listening to this thinking, why don't we initiate a call with procurement? Because we have some new tech or a new team, or, as you say, some innovation, something that's changed that we can help the procurement team understand better, because it's an opportunity to strengthen the relationship.
It is. And I know everyone's not like me, right, in terms of how I was taught, and trained to be in procurement. And excuse me, part of it is just my personality and who I am. I'm curious by nature. I really do like people, and communicating with people and getting to know them better. And I really have learned that when I know people better and I understand what makes them tick or get up in the morning, um, that it only helps me work with them better. And I know that's not for everyone. We're all human, we're all different. How we communicate is different. But for me, it's super, super important to get to know you and sit next to you and break bread with you. And I do think it pays off in spades. I know a lot of people are going to be listening to this and saying, I just don't have time for that, or, that's just not important to me. And I do think it's all about what you value. Um, but for me, that is what I value. I value those personal relationships that pull through, and it has worked for me personally. I understand that other people work different ways. So I can only speak to for myself and how I've trained other people who have worked for me, but I really do think it's worthwhile.
And I suppose for someone listening to this, also, we have to think of marketing procurement are ultimately investing in their own knowledge to make themselves more valuable to the organization and to the marketing team. So it's a win-win, isn't it?
It is, and procurement has changed and morphed as every part of the industry has, and so much more emphasis now is being put on stakeholder engagement. Not to say that contracts and negotiations and all those pieces are not important, but really getting a seat at the table with your stakeholder and trying to be more proactive with them about planning in terms of what are their needs today, what are their needs in 6 months, what are their needs in 12 months, what are their needs in 2 years, just so I can start to plan and be more proactive in what I do. And I also need that hook to meet with my marketing stakeholders, right? So if I go and meet with an agency, tell me about a new product or system or something that they're investing in, and then I can tell my marketer when I'm talking to them about a contract or an extension, and I can bring that to them. Well, now it's a win win on both sides, right? They didn't have to go to that meeting yet. I've planted the seed that that technology exists, and I can continue to bring that up as our relationship and our needs continue to evolve. And so I put it in my filing cabinet.
I'm glad you brought up the subject of stakeholder engagement because I'm just recalling a conversation I had just last week, and this isn't the first time this has come up. For agencies trying to manage the stakeholders that they have to deal with in a company is difficult, particularly when it can be difficult. I'm not saying it's always difficult, especially when you're trying to align internal stakeholders around a project or a subject or a workshop. Any advice or guidance that you can give if I'm an external agency and I need to engage several stakeholders?
I mean, that is definitely tougher, and every company is set up differently. So I can only speak from my personal experience. And my personal experience is I liked and found it helpful to sort of be the conduit to those conversations, right? So if my agency is telling me they're having a hard time getting their marketer or their marketing team on the phone, not to discuss day to day, right, or a creative brief or something like that, but something bigger, I try to insert myself to be involved for that. And that way I can hear it on both sides, right? I can be present, and I can also make sure that it's not a dog and pony show, that the meeting isn't longer than it needs to be, right? People's time is incredibly valuable on both sides of the aisle. So I would say engage your procurement person, tell them about it, tell them, that you have your regular meetings to discuss creative briefs or your SOW for the year, things of that nature, or changes in staff, but there are other items you like to bring forward. The other conduit for that, obviously, is business review meetings. And everyone has different governance, for how they work with their agencies. But I would hope that at every company, no matter how big or how small you are, that you're having some sort of business review. So whether it's quarterly or once a year or twice a year, and hopefully at those meetings, you have the right people at the table on both sides. And I would say, especially if you're only meeting one time of year, Really important to sort of have the executive leaders on both sides come to that meeting, even if that's how you kick off the meeting and they can only give 15 minutes. But I think it's really important to show the engagement on both sides and sort of bring anything new or anything you've been wanting to talk to them about to that meeting.
I love that. Great, great tips. With those business review meetings, QBRs, half yearly business reviews, what have you seen work really, really well? Like, can you think of an example? You don't have to name names of an agency that's really conducted it well, and why?
I think, when I've conducted them, where I've come from and where I am now, I think it's really important to really establish the agenda with everyone involved so there's no surprises and that everyone really does their homework to come to the table and that you really think about the people you're inviting and that it makes sense. Whether, again, if it makes sense for the executive team to be there for the first 15 minutes and cover off a few things and then really get down to it. And I think it's important that the agency and the marketer and yourself in procurement feel like you touched the agenda and had an impact on what we're talking about because otherwise then it's not valuable for you. And I think it's important that you talk about all the key things, like performance and staffing and key deliverables and timelines and any risks that might be coming up. And obviously, I always want to do a financial review and talk about budgets and savings because I do work in procurement. But I also think, to talk about optimization opportunities, this is a perfect time for sort of that innovation showcase. And again, not just showing like, oh, we acquired this technology, but show how it's actually working in practice with someone else. Um, and I really like to have open communication at those meetings. I mean, no surprises. I would hate that. But I do think it's an opportunity for marketers to really say to the agency, this is what you're doing really well. Compliment them, right? There isn't a lot of time in the day to day workplace for people to say, you're doing a great job. But let's be honest, it really does feel good when someone tells you you're doing a great job at something, right? Or you beat a timeline on something. And to hear that from your marketer and maybe your supervisor is at that meeting too, so they can hear that. And that still is important in today's workplace, right? People want to feel valued and valuable.
I think that was a mini masterclass in what to bring to marketing procurement. I love it. Let's just reflect on what you just said because this is getting really granular and I'm sure people are scribbling notes. So co-create the agenda to make sure
Yes,
everyone's aligned. Think about who needs to be in the room and what their role is going to be, and particularly senior leadership on both sides. Like get the executives, even if it's 15 minutes to open. Make sure that you're covering all the salient points that you would expect to see in a review: performance, deliverables, savings, but also, most importantly, how you can optimize what you're currently doing to help the company moving forward. And then showcase some innovation. What can we surprise the client with? Something exciting, something new that will hopefully keep them coming back for more. And then no surprises, and celebrate and high five each other if things have gone well, because there's not a lot of good times sometimes, is there, when your back is against the wall and you're fighting fires. So thank you for
absolutely. And
sharing that.
yeah, absolutely.
So let's move on to another big question, which is all about how procurement are measured. In order for the agency and the account manager to understand the person in procurement's world, you know, how are they actually? What KPIs do they have?
Sure. I mean, I think some of them I just touched on with regard to the QBR. We would touch on those as well, right? Obviously, performance, how you're staffing the account, key deliverables, timelines, anything that might be of risk, budget, savings, innovation. But for me, it's also this working relationship that is 100% built on trust and open communication. And that's true for the marketer or the agency. I want to know if there's something that's not going perfectly well. It might seem so insignificant, right, in the moment, but I want to know because in my tenure in procurement, I've learned that sometimes those little cracks suddenly turn into big gaping holes very quickly, especially if you're working towards a launch or some big project. And so I feel like no issue, no matter how big or small, I would want the day to day lead at the agency to tell me about it. And then I also think it's important, and I always do, keep a line open, to the president or the head of the agency that I'm working with, especially if we have a lot of work with you. Doesn't need to be every day or every week, right? But periodically, hop on the phone with them. Again, it could be quick, 10, 15 minutes, but say, this is what I'm hearing. What are you hearing? Because I also know that none of us in procurement or none of us in big pharma or small biotech are perfect, and everyone is running at a million miles a minute. So it's important every once in a while for someone, and I like to take on that role, to just do a pulse check. How's it working on both sides? Anything I need to be aware of? That awareness allows me, even if it's just in my little bubble sitting here at my desk, to think about a backup or a contingency plan. And I also think it allows me to sort of talk through those plans when I speak to the day to day lead at the agency, the head of the marketing team, or the lead at the agency. Um, and again, they may never come to fruition, but I like to always be thinking about what could be coming, right? Is there a change in personnel that might be needed? Are we thinking like strategy's going well, but maybe we need a little bit more in terms of strategy personnel on the agency side? Maybe the creative's going well, but we're thinking we might need some sort of freshen up to it, or a whole new campaign might be coming, but maybe we haven't told the agency yet, right? That would require a lot more personnel and a lot more hours. And so these aren't things agencies can flip on a switch. And I think they really appreciate knowing what could be coming. I like to keep those sort of draft plans in motion at all times, even if we never need it. And I just think keeping those communication lines open is just so valuable to the relationship. It builds that trust, it builds that partnership, and it allows you to really have those great conversations, but also those really hard ones.
Love that. Really important to preempt what's coming for resourcing. And you're absolutely right. This is super valuable for an agency because obviously we're very reactive to your plans and your workload. So let's talk for a moment about selection of an agency.
Sure.
When you're leading a search or reviewing a roster, what does a best in class agency look like now?
Yeah. I've been in the industry so long that my tried and true agencies that I work with, I've known them now for 20 years, which is crazy. And I know what they're doing. I've established relationships with them. I can have those sort of tough conversations. And I feel like at the end of the day, they know what they need to do to compete if searching for a new agency or even a new agency within their network. I also know and believe that in today's world, as much as new work is important to an agency, that because of the relationships I've built, that my agencies won't say yes to an RFP or an opportunity if they know they don't have the resources or the expertise to knock it out of the park and win. But I think at the end of the day, we all know, and I know this is a tough thing for agency partners to hear, but it's the truth. At the end of the day, so much of winning an account is about chemistry. And it's not chemistry with me, it's chemistry with the marketing team. So that's such an intangible, right, to bring into a pitch process. And we all know how much money and time is invested on the agency side for these pitch processes. And the last thing you want to hear at the end of the day is, we loved your creative. We loved this, we loved that, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't a fit. There's nothing really you can go back to the table and fix for the next time on that, right? It just wasn't a fit. But I will say, over the past few years, there are sort of these new, smaller, niche agencies that are coming to the table as well. And I know a lot of big pharma now only work with one or two agencies, so probably not talking about them at the moment. But I'm not sure if I should name names here, Jenny, but you actually introduced me to a smaller niche agency who I felt like when I met them, just had sort of this special something. Um, it was the chemistry of the team, it was their innovative approach. And I met with them actually as a favor to you and just really enjoyed meeting them and learning about them. Didn't have anything for them at the time. But again, it was one of those pieces that I sort of put in my filing cabinet. Um, and sure enough, a day came where I needed to bring them in to meet with a marketing team. And I just really thought that their innovation and their out of the box creative and the way they were able to sort of build relationship and chemistry in a unique way really won the business for them. And so, I did have a niche agency come in and win this business. So again, it goes back to what I talked about a few minutes ago about this cultivating relationships. Even if you're not working with someone today, yes, I know it takes time, but I do think it's worthwhile. I met with this agency for 15 to 20 minutes one day, learned about their capabilities, filed it away. They would contact me a couple times a year to tell me about new things they were doing, maybe new business they won in healthcare or something innovative or new personnel that they had. And then when the time was right, I brought them into a pitch process. So it can happen, and then they won it. I
If
know it
you
doesn't
could
always happen
borrow,
like that.
listen, I
Sorry.
think this is no, sorry, there's a slight delay. This is a huge thing for an agency. It's like just because it doesn't happen straight away doesn't mean it hasn't been, like you said, filed in the right place. I'm interested in when you met that agency, you used the words, innovation. If you if you could help an agency understand what that chemistry, what was it about them that you thought actually these guys are different?
I just liked their story. And again, I know that's so intangible, but it was a little bit of your typical story, right? They worked in big agency and then decided to go out on their own. And I do think when you go out on your own and you have to struggle a little bit, it's a different kind of grit, right? And you come to the table with nothing to lose. And so it's a different type of presentation. It's not something I can completely describe, but there is, you know, like this wild confidence, I think, that comes with that, right? We have nothing to lose. Here we are. We're meeting you for the first time. We think we have these cool things. We think we do it differently. And they can, because maybe there's seven people, rather than an agency of hundreds of people. And it's just interesting and different. And I think that there's a role for them to play, even a role for them to play even if you have like a bigger agency in place, but sometimes that agency might be overworked in terms of if you have too many products launching at the same time or too much going on, right? And isn't there a place for another agency to sort of slide in and maybe bring insights or do some cool creative or do some cool market research? So I do think it's something people should think about a little bit more and not only think about, oh, well, we only work with these one or two agencies. So I can't think about meeting anybody new.
Yeah, I've got quite a few questions around this because if
Sure.
there's a niche agency listening to this and think, hey, I have got a chance against the big boys, and maybe they know that this particular pharma company has one of those one company deals with an agency network that's kind of sewn up. Can you just give me your perspective on, obviously there's you're purchasing it in a number of categories. Typically, when one of these one agency deals are made with a pharma company, is there still room for the independent niched agencies to get a foot in the door? Or is it on a contract by contract basis? I know it's a difficult question. I just kind of wanted to throw it out there because I know lots of different examples of where it's actually, there has been some wiggle room.
I think it's that broad answer. It depends, right? And no one's going to like that when they're listening to this, but it really does depend, right? And it's situational. So I think when the opportunities come up, it is typically around, and what I have seen, maybe a product that we've purchased or in licensed, right? So it was a surprise and wasn't on our single or double or triple agency roster, right? And maybe they don't have the therapeutic expertise, or maybe they don't have the bandwidth to be able to take it on right away. So I feel like that's where I've seen in my tenure more of sort of those opportunities come up where we're able to, I don't want to say sneak in, but allow another agency to come in and do a piece of business or work. And again, it might not be forever, but maybe it's to help us cross over and bring this new product or these new products into our lineup. And that is when I've seen the most opportunity for sort of these niche agencies. And so then it's like a circular piece, right, Jenny? If someone in procurement hasn't allowed the opportunity for them to meet and be open to knowing about other agency partners, when these opportunities come up, they're not armed with the information about who might be out there in a niche capacity or might have this type of therapeutic expertise. And for me, and always wanting to develop myself and be better at what I was doing, it was great to go to industry meetings, and it was great to hear about sort of these new agencies up and coming. Again, even if I couldn't use them today or even tomorrow, even if it was next year, but I did sort of like having this filing cabinet, so to speak, of agencies that were available if I ever needed them.
I think that's I think that's a good rule of thumb for anyone in most leadership roles, don't you? They call it filling the bench. Who do we fill the bench with so that we've got them ready to go? So I think I'm the same. I'm always developing my perspective, and I think getting out there and meeting people is key. Something has come up in my mind to ask you. If you have an agency, let's say, that's just got an MSA with you, a master services agreement for maybe one brand or one product, how would you advise that agency to start the engagement process with procurement? And how helpful would you be in helping them open doors within the organization?
Yeah, that's always a really tough call, right? Because, I want to be a partner to my marketing friends, but I don't want to overburden them with, having to meet agencies that we're not even working with or that they're not working with. So I really do look for those opportunities, and it goes back to that stakeholder engagement conversation we had a few minutes ago. So as procurement has moved more into this stakeholder engagement role, it does allow me to meet with my marketers, a few times a year, and during those conversations to be able to say, what are you thinking in terms of new vendors you might need for next year? Or how's it working out with your current vendors? Or is there any service that you think you might need augmented by an additional agency or a different supplier? And during those conversations, that's when I can say, well, I have this agency working over here on this product, and they might be helpful to you when you have the same need or require the same service. So I do think that stakeholder engagement piece is so important, and most of us in procurement are working across multiple therapeutic areas or multiple marketers, and so I think in this age of not everyone comes to the office every day, we don't have that water cooler talk that we used to have. And so where I do think marketers used to meet, at the coffee machine or the water cooler and say, who are you working with? How's it going? Are you still working with X? That doesn't really happen anymore. And so again, another role for procurement to fill to say, hey, did you know your friend and colleague over here is working with this person? It's going really well. Or we brought this small agency in to cover this work and it's working really well. I don't think the days of that cold call of an agency to a marketer probably work anymore. maybe every once in a while, if you had the relationship or if you see them, at a conference, you might be able to grab them for coffee or meet them at a booth. I think that still works. But sending a cold called email or a cold called call, I don't think those work anymore.
How do people try to cold call you?
Sometimes I just call my cell phone, which I always find super interesting, because you don't even know if the person's going to answer or if they have 5 minutes. I like emails because then I can really think about what they're saying in the email. And no matter what, I always try to write back to say, I'm not available today or not looking today, but this could be interesting for me. Would you mind contacting me in January, or would you mind contacting me in July? Or I don't mind if you check in with me a couple times a year. And that's also a good gauge for me because are they listening? So if I say that and then they actually listen to what I say, that's great. If they don't and the next week they're emailing me again, I'm not sure that's someone I want to be in a partnership with because I thought I was being very transparent with them.
Okay,
I
that
also get
makes
a
sense.
lot of messages on LinkedIn. And those are interesting too because you're in LinkedIn and then you can go look at the company. You can see, who else you might know that might know them or is working with them. So I do think LinkedIn works too, but not everyone checks their LinkedIn messages every day. So also be patient with that because some people go onto LinkedIn once a week or once a month. So you probably have to be more patient if you're going that avenue.
In terms of your wariness about taking on board a new agency, what are some of the red flags you look for? Like, what would make
Sure.
you feel nervous about working with an agency?
I think there's a few things that I see as red flags. Turnover is obviously a huge red flag for me. And I've been in the industry long enough and I know enough people. Um, so I hear things. So obviously, not if there's some obvious something going on, right? A recent merger, acquisition, something like that. But if your agency can't retain people, for longer than 6 months or a year, that's a flag for me. Um, Also, big price jumps year over year. So, say we've been working together and we have a great partnership, and then all of a sudden, a huge price jump lands on my desk. That's definitely a flag for me, and I would need to understand the reasoning behind that. Another big feedback for me is probably, not listening to feedback when given. So if we're having conversations and even if it's just those cracks that I'm making you aware of and you're not good at taking the feedback or putting it into action or talking about a game plan, that's a red flag for me. So I think, that's probably it in terms of red flags.
That was really useful. And when we're talking about pricing, I've got just one question actually, because it came up again in a conversation quite recently about price increases. So the agency was saying that one particular agreement they had with a client, they'd kept the same pricing for, I think it was over 2 years. And they wanted to communicate that the price was increasing, the hourly rate was increasing. This is going to sound so obvious, but I'm going to ask you the question anyway. How would you suggest an agency approach that task?
I think it's like everything else, right? In procurement, we're always open to the pricing conversation. Obviously, contracts are written a certain way, which allows rates to come up, whether that's annually, every 2 years, every 3 years, right? Every MSA is written a little bit differently. But I'm always open to the conversation. I'm always open to seeing what you put in front of me. Obviously, I will analyze it. And I'll have to bring it back to leadership. Procurement in and of itself, we don't own the budgets, right? So we have to go back to marketing and their leadership. And a lot of people have sort of been coming up with some, innovative models for pricing or maybe a value-based model. Um, all interesting. And again, I'm always open to looking at that. In true transparency for who I am, though, I always, at the end of the day, no matter what model you're putting in front of me, I need to see the hourly rate, right? I'm a time and materials procurement professional, and I want to see, the rate and the hours that are making up what we're paying for. So after 20 plus years in the business, I sort of know what we should be paying. So I want to see that. I've also set up many deliverable rate cards in my time, and I'm completely open to that, but not without backing out of it and seeing the number of hours and the rate that it's building up into. And I think, like all things we've talked about on this call today, transparency is the key for me. I want to know what we're paying for. That allows me to have an open and honest conversation and allows both of us to have the opportunities to negotiate, and try to figure out where there can be, excuse me, potential efficiencies and discounts, on both sides, right? Because at the end of the day, we're both businesses. Um, the agency needs to make money, and for the most part, in pharma and biotech right now, we need to save money. So there are always ways for us to meet in the middle, but it starts with an open, honest, transparent conversation.
So that leads me quite nicely onto the AI question, as
Sure.
we have to talk about AI always, in every podcast conversation. With agencies now, they're being advised to move to more of an output based pricing model, and where possible value based rather than hours, because we know that AI is doing things so much quicker. Do you have any what are the conversations you've been having about the impact of AI on the industry?
Absolutely. Um, I loved all the questions you asked for today, but this one was the most interesting, and actually have been doing a lot of, research and reading on the topic probably for a few years, but over the last 6 months, even more. And I have a lot to say on this topic, so I'll try to be concise. And I've been speaking to a lot of agency leads about this probably for the last year. Um, and I think the challenge is, right, on many sides, on the client side, so pharma and biotech, we're looking to save money with AI. And in some cases, I've heard that companies are even taking a certain percentage out of their budget to sort of account for the fact that our suppliers, where we're talking about agencies or someone else, are utilizing AI initiatives. And it's a lot to think about, right? And what I'm about to say might be controversial, but I'm not sure I completely agree with that mentality today at the end of 2025. I'm not saying one day I might not agree with that, but I'm just not sure that we're there yet, right? And so you're going to say, well, why is that? So for me, learning, through our agency partners and other avenues about setting up AI internally, it does take a certain amount of investment, in technology and in training your personnel, right? It's a different way of working completely. So I just want to be careful that we aren't over squeezing agency or other supplier partners in the hopes that it'll pay off, right? So they're taking risks, they're investing. We're asking for a certain percentage off. And is that too much all at one time? I'm not sure. But I do think it's something we all need to think about. Um, we've had other points in the industry where there's been a shiny new object, and I just feel like this is the latest, and it's a big one, right? Shiny new object, and everyone is chasing, and AI is the new buzzword. But I think the key difference with AI as opposed to other shiny new objects we've seen in the past is how quickly everything is happening and changing almost on the daily or the weekly, right? So for me, when thinking about AI in the context of agencies, I think the key is strategy and creative will still need to be top notch. And I think we'll be able to layer in some AI to be brought in other places in the agency relationship. And hopefully, when we can bring them in those places, that will save all of us time and money. I did read a really interesting article this week, and there were a few take homes, and it was very timely, that I thought I would share here. So the article talked about the fact that yes, we'll need to change the way we work, but that the work will still begin and end with humans. And I thought that that was really, really like a really strong statement, right? And it's people, not technology, that will be the true game changers. And I thought that that was also super hopeful, right? Because I do think people, when they start to think about AI, they're worried, will I have a job in the future? Is there a place for me? So I thought that those two things were really hopeful. I also think we have to remember what AI is great for, right? It's really great for boosting productivity, for generating insights, for helping us improve outcomes, but not for making those ultimate decisions. And the article that I read talked about AI not driving the innovation, that it's our high performing, diverse teams with bold ideas and the strategic thinking that actually does drive the innovation. So the key for me was we all need to empower our people, whether it's in the agency or in pharma or in biotech. We need to be investing in them, and they need to be learning about AI and how it can be utilized in your particular area, and then use that AI to sort of amplify everyone's potential. And I just thought it was just such an interesting way to think about it, because I think there's so much sky is falling and panic around AI. And for me, this article sort of really flipped the entire coin for me, and it was so hopeful.
I think it's a very hopeful slant on things, and empowering the people and AI enablement is so much different from a language perspective than, AI first even, or, you know,
Correct.
so I love that perspective as well. And just out of interest, Jess, when you said, I've heard that some companies are kind of slicing off X percent from their spend with agencies as a budget, what percentage are you seeing that they're reducing their overall kind of projected spend?
I've heard everything, and what I've heard from is really the agency side, but I've heard everything from, 5 or 10%, 7%. I've also heard as much as 15 to 20%. And I just feel like it's probably a little bit too soon to be shaving off those drastic amounts for AI when we're not even really sure which tasks or jobs or people they're replacing in this relationship.
I think that's really, really prudent. It's a bit too soon. So I agree, because we're all at different stages in the adoption of AI and how proficiently our teams are actually using it. I agree.
Exactly. And, I think it's different if you and I were having a conversation, which we're not, about a manufacturing line or something like that, right? I think in those instances, there probably are percentages you can just shave off. I don't work in that line of business, but just based upon what I've read, and I'm continuing to read, I think that that is a possibility, but not in the industry that we're talking about today.
Yeah. Jessica, I'm going to wrap things up there because I'm just conscious of your time. You've shared so much value. Thank you so much. It really is so useful for agencies to hear it from the proverbial horse's mouth, so to speak. So a huge thank you from me. And for anyone listening, anyone, who would you like to hear from, if anyone, and who? How's the best way to contact you? What's the best
Sure.
way?
I mean, I think an email is great, or you can message me on LinkedIn. I do check it often, so I'm happy to hear from anyone. I think increasing your network, is always great, and I've enjoyed everyone that you've introduced me to, Jenny, along the way. And I think, as I've stated throughout this conversation, I just never know what I'm going to need tomorrow or next month or next year. And so I think just continuing to make connections in this agency world, in this procurement world, is just a good thing. And I look forward to connecting with whoever wants to have, real conversations about these topics.
Amazing. Jess, thank you so, so much. This has been absolutely fabulous.
Thanks, Jenny. I've loved every minute of it. It really makes me come out of my shell, and it's not completely comfortable for me to do something like this, but I do enjoy talking to you and sharing insights, and I look forward to doing it again.
I'm very grateful, and you're absolutely welcome back again anytime you want to.
Thank you.